So firstly, again, let me introduce all the way from Fort Collins in Colorado, Sarah Levinger, a consumer psychology consultant and author of the Best Brands Do This newsletter. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Yep. And reminding our audience listening in American for when Sarah speaks. And in Australia, from the sunny Gold Coast in Queensland, is founder and CEO of media agency Undivided, and author of an upcoming book, Unforgettable, Your Brand, Their Brain, Jonathan Rolley.
Thank you, Malcolm. Very excited to be here.
Good to see you, Jono. So you've both got very unique ways of developing your expertise in this field. Sarah, why don't you share with us how you got started?
Yeah, I've actually been in marketing for about 16 years. I was kind of a generalist for that entire time. I worked as a consultant, as a freelancer. So I had all these clients kept coming in the door asking me if I knew how to do WordPress websites or social media management, those type of things. And because I was a freelancer, I just had to go learn how to do it on my own. So I went to the library, of all places, to get those big books of like marketing for dummies and like understanding social media and all these different things. And right next to that section of marketing was all these books on neuroscience and economics and understanding the human brain, neuromarketing in particular. And that I just got hooked on the information and then consumed it for about 10 straight years.
Wow.
And then I landed in paid advertising in 2020. And so I've been applying the psychology to paid advertising in particular for the last 4 years.
Okay, that's interesting. So you're self-taught in that way. Reminds me of Drayton Bird, an old colleague and a world-famous marketer who walked out of uni and went to read all the books on advertising in the Manchester Library. Well, all 2 of them, he said. But that made him an expert because no one else had read any of them. So, Jono, you've got a very different background into how you got into it. Share your story, please.
Yeah, I do. My background or university was industrial design. I was wanting to be the next car designer for Aston Martin was my desire. And then one winter morning in Melbourne, I had a brain tumor that fell into my lap quite quickly and changed my direction and course in life. And you know, I got really interested and curious about the brain, understandably, and went client side, Fortune 500, and then advertising. But I've had this real curiosity in terms of how do we influence and persuade, and more evidence-based using neuroscience and neuromarketing to understand the decision-making process. So yeah, quite a different
something really good came out of something that potentially wasn't. That's fascinating stuff. So this is an interesting field. And when I first started working in marketing, I just assumed that I'd work with professional types who understood human psychology and how the mind works when it comes to making decisions to buy stuff. I just thought that's what would be. Unfortunately, most of the agencies I worked with knew very little about consumer psychology or marketing, let alone business. They knew a lot about TARPs and charging 50 cents per photocopy page though. But things have changed in agencies since then. But the missing element in most marcoms is still a basic understanding around consumer psychology. Sarah, is there a definition that you would use for neuromarketing or psychology-based advertising that easily explains it?
Yeah, I think any sort of like neuromarketing or neuroscience goes down into kind of how people tick. So we're really kind of dissecting emotions, behavior, and the cultural piece of humanity and using that to kind of inform our marketing strategies. So it really is just a deep emotional connections with your customers.
Okay. And you know, all good advertising has an emotional connection, as we know. Jono, you speak about neuromarketing, the subject, to people around the world, you know, all over the planet. Can you explain the 3 brains and the role they play in our decision making? Thanks. We've got some slides here that you can talk to.
Yeah, sounds good. This is kind of an introduction and it's overly simplified in many different ways, but conceptually, this is one of the most powerful frameworks I've come across to understand how humans process information and more so how do you design and shape advertising or marketing messaging. So if we look at the 3 brains here, we've got our old brain or our reptilian brain. So this is our most basic and primal hardware that we've got. And then we've got our midbrain or a mammalian brain, limbic system. It's got a range of different names. But in essence, this is our mammalian brain. And this is how we behave as herd. We're a herd animal. So this is how we behave contextually in different environments. And then what we have is our new brain, which is our neocortex. So this is what really separates humans from the rest of the animal kingdom. And it's really what's given us advantage in both survival, because we can think critically and make better decision making. Now, the caveat to the three brains is, yes, it is overly simplified, but most people like to think in their neocortex, their new brain. The bulk of decision making is actually made in our ancient brain, which is our reptilian and midbrain. So that's really where we want to spend most of our time discussing today.
Fascinating. Sarah, I assume your research of 250 books supports this, and you used it to understand how it affects the way humans react to marketing messages?
Oh, yes. Oh, 100%. Anytime I go through and do any research for the customers that I'm working with, I work primarily in D2C and e-commerce. This is where we start, is by understanding kind of this older brain, reptilian brain. Some people call it subconscious, right? And then working up to the actual logical brain, because after all of that reading, what I've noticed the most is we make emotional decisions and then justify them with logic.
Yes.
And that's based on this exact system here, is system 1, system 2. So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Yeah, Jono, these brain facts that you were talking about were some of the foundations of Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, and the System 1 and System 2 theory. Do you want to just take us through that?
Yeah, for those of you who've read it, congratulations. I think less than 20% of people actually make it through. It's heavy reading. It's really PhD type of material. But System 1 is really our reptilian mammalian. It's bundled into System 1, which is a really simple and elegant way of describing how we process information. So System 1 is really fast. It's unconscious. It's automatic. It's really where bulk of decision making is made. It's argued it's over 95% of all consumer decisions are made predominantly in System 1. And then we've got System 2. So this is our neocortex. So this is our rational brain. So any thought you've got going through your mind right now is occurring in your System 2 or your neocortex. But important to note, this takes a huge amount of energy to drive. So we can become really fatigued if we make too many decisions with System 2, which is why bulk of decision making occurs in System 1.
Right, because it's easier. It takes less effort.
It is easier.
Yeah. And Sarah, you said you use this in your business as well.
Yes, absolutely. Typically, we start with understanding how System 1 comes into play, depending on the industry that we're trying to market in. So oftentimes, we'll see System 1 actually work a lot better, messaging-wise, than if we try and go after straight logic. And that's why I default to emotional or heuristics use, like mental shortcuts, right, that the brain uses, because it just works better. It's faster.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, so we're both heading in the same direction. And this understanding of how the brain works has led to the development of neuro-marketing theory and the role of what you call attention metrics, Jono.
Yeah, we've seen in the last 3-4 years, attention metrics really gain speed. In Australia, it's probably been more the last 18 months, but this is part of understanding the human brain. It's by no means end to end, so it does have bias. But if you're looking at neuromarketing, the field, it's been around for about 20 years, and it's starting to get a point now where it's starting to be really, really important understanding how do we influence and persuade. Like if you look at cognitive bias, I think there's 188 of them. So yeah, attention plays a really critical role in any effective advertising.
And you've got a case study that demonstrates how this works, correct? We're going to have a look at.
We've got several, and again, there's different ways of looking at neuromarketing to understand how the brain processes information. So this is with a partner of ours that actually is an EEG machine. So it's a helmet that sits on consumers' heads, and it monitors their brain activity as they're being exposed to ads. So if you're looking at the brain, it actually processes information in 3 to 7 second increments. So it should cascade up and down. So the chart you're seeing here is for a client of ours, Save the Children. And again, they're a charity, so they're trying to get an immediate response or a direct response from consumers to raise money. So when you're looking at this chart on screen, what we did learn and what we continue to learn is where deep memory forms, we actually see really high response rates. And this, when you go into the neurochemistry of the human brain, for a charity, there's actually a formula. So you want to elicit pain, which elicits cortisol in the body, but then you want to take them to safety, which then releases FGF2 and ARC proteins. And this is this cascading of chemicals that not only forms deep memory, but you get large response rates. So this is where you're seeing the theory of pain pleasure or problem solution come into play.
When you say form deep memory, how quickly can that be formed? If you're playing a 30-second ad?
Immediately, Memory is immediate. And again, there's different types of memory. So you've got episodic memory, which is one exposure, or you've got semantic memory. So there's different types of memory. So again, you also want to remind, refresh, and reinforce memory structures. So that's why frequency becomes really important to reinforce that semantic memory. But memory is really tied to emotion. So if you're looking at throughout any of your or the viewer's experience, if you've been in a car crash or a relationship, highly emotive, huge amount of cortisol, and there's typically safety taken after or soon thereafter. So you've got this cascade of chemicals that forms memory, but it's emotional that is the key, or emotion is the key to forming deep memory.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting because curiously, I wrote a script for DRTV for Christian Children's Fund, the earlier precursor to who you're working with back in the day. And what we did was, there were two parts that we did. We emphasised the saving of a single child's life rather than the problem being too big. So the fear we created was this one person. Then we showed them the solution. And then what we did was I negotiated with Yoko Ono, of all people, for John Lennon's So This Is Christmas. And the lyrics of that are, so this is Christmas, what have you done? Another year over, a new one just begun. We played on the guilt of, you know, you've been sitting there all year enjoying yourself. What have you done to help these young children like this one? And donations broke all records here and in the US. So is emotional music something that works really well to generate response, Sarah?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I see this every day in D2C. I mean, the music that you play in the background, especially on social media ads, can drastically change conversion rates, click-through rates, engagement, and it all comes down to what you're kind of trying to elicit. And marketers in particular, I've noticed, have a really easy time with copy and messaging, but they don't necessarily think as much about what music is playing, what visual is in front of the music, and what you want that to convey as well, because it all has to be congruent. So yeah, music is huge.
It's interesting you say it, because if you look at typical agencies, they always had creative people who understood that. Unfortunately, most of the tech bros don't. They understand how to type, you know, and that's about it. And your thoughts, Jono, on music?
Music is incredibly powerful for emotion, but also if you're looking at memory, like you think of most people that listen to their favorite songs, it's typically songs they listened to as teenagers when they were going through a range of experiences, and it can bring them back to those moments. So if you're looking at a hijack of a song, which is incredibly clever, you've got these really favorable memory structures to this song and you're anchoring a brand to it. Like there's a lot of lovely things to it, but sound and song, especially if it's in theta rhythm, delivers really magical things for a brand.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, as Homer Simpson said, rock and roll was complete in 1975. It's a scientifically proven fact, so maybe our choice of music has to go back a little bit. You've both kindly shared some examples for us to view today, and so we're going to put those on the screen while you talk to them. We'll go through them together, you know, we'll make sure we sync them correctly. And let's start with a couple of examples of distinction bias. Sarah, this is one of yours from a client of yours.
Yes, so distinction bias has to do with the brain's kind of tendency to make better decisions if it can kind of see things side by side. So this is, I usually describe this as like, as soon as you give context for what decision the customer should be making, it's a lot easier to make that decision. So I have two ads that were actually ran by a good friend of mine who owns an agency, both of which ran in the same ad account, one of which though only spent $100, which in Facebook terms means that that didn't do very well. It didn't get enough engagement for Facebook to really put a lot of money behind it. And the second one actually spent over $100,000 over the course of time. So both of these ads ran exact same time. Do you want to take a guess as to which one it was that spent the $100,000, or should I just tell you?
The audience can. I know the answer. So yeah, you tell them and tell them why.
It was actually the ad on the right, the one that says "So good I almost cried." This was the one that ran $100,000+ over the course of a few weeks, and I personally believe it was because of this distinction bias. You have two caramels, one of which looks delicious and obviously like the better choice, and then the other one kind of looks like it's been in your grandma's purse for a few years. This distinction bias makes it really easy for the customer to see what's the better choice.
Okay, that's a really nice example. And the nice thing about distinction bias is in social, you can split run tests pretty quickly and learn. As you said, you went from $100 to spending $100,000 based on what worked. And Jono, you've got an example. We've got a TVC that you're going to take us through. Let's have a look at the TVC, then you can discuss it.
The globe on the left is a 50-watt halogen downlight. The globe on the right is a LED-ified LED. The globe on the left needs replacing every year. The LED on the right lasts over 22 years. The globe on the left costs $32 a year to run. The LED on the right costs $7 a year. The LED you see on the right is called EVA. We just don't see the point in the other one.
Switch to LED-ified 1.3 LEDs.
So share your thoughts on that, Jono.
Yeah, thanks, Malcolm. And just to riff off what Sarah was saying, like it is distinction bias. So what is distinction bias? It's a comparator. So the human brain can only process information when it's got something to contrast against. It needs something to compare against. So hot only exists with cold, tall with short. So when we're showing this, we've got a halogen on the left, and we can see the price in it being replaced quite often. Then you got a LED LED-ified on the right, which is a much lower cost, and it's really simple. And just to also riff off Sarah's example, looking at that particular ad with the caramels, like it's got a great headline, but it's really simple in terms of the way it leads the audience through its attention. So the headline captures the attention, it pulls it through, and then you can compare really elegantly, and it's really simple, which is the better alternative. Same with the LED-ified ad. It's really simple. We talk through one solution, we hold the attention there, we go deep, and then we pull them through to the comparator on the right. And we must guide the viewer's attention accordingly, rather than everything all on screen at once without having an attention hierarchy.
Yeah, so they don't have to make that decision. You lead it. You take them by the nose and lead them.
That's correct.
And interesting, that was a DRTV, so the only way you could buy that product was in response to that television commercial. So you know pretty quickly whether or not it's making money.
Well, it is just on that one, like the client was spending over $5 million on TV, 500 grand a month, and they said TV didn't work. And we said, no, you've just got 7 different messages in an ad, and none of them particularly hit really hard. So we only had $10,000 to produce it. So it just goes to show you, when you understand the principles, you don't need big budget to be really effective. And that ad outperformed by 50 times.
Wow. Yeah, great example of it. Okay, Sarah, you also talk about social proof and how it's not just a testimonial or a customer review, but you can increase purchase intention on product detail pages by large amounts, like up to 30%, by viewing, by who's viewed the product, how many people have viewed it. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so this goes across the board. Every time we've used this in e-commerce or D2C, it works every single time. Anytime that you can show either how many people are viewing it, or how many people purchased it, or how many people have it in their cart, it's usually just a small button or like a badge somewhere on the actual product page. This drastically increases people's ability to understand how many other people either trust the brand or interested in the product. It also creates like a little bit of urgency in people, because the more people are looking at it, the higher the chance that I'm not going to be able to get one if all of these people purchase. So the brain is making those kind of quick decisions based upon just one small number that just says 100 people are viewing this.
Well,
it's super powerful.
Yeah, and it is, and it's very simple. And in fact, Cellarmaster Wines invented the people who looked at that also looked at this, or people who bought that also bought this wine. Then it was copied by Amazon. It was actually created by a wine company in Australia. Sarah, as you've said, social proof is not just a testimonial or customer review, but you can increase purchase intention on product detail pages on e-commerce sites by at least 30% just by showing how many views a product has had. Can you explain that?
Yeah, especially in e-commerce, it doesn't always have to be views either. It can be how many people are currently looking at it, how many people have it in their cart, how many people have actually purchased this. Any sort of social proof that can be displayed on the page, usually in just a small format, like a button or a badge, has a really, really good impact on the amount of people interested in the product. So you'll often see really, really good engagement and even better conversions on the pages that have this social proof element of showing how many people are looking at things. It's really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and it's not difficult to do either, and because people, as you say, they do like the social proof. Way back when, in the early days of the internet, Cellarmaster Wines was a pioneer, and they invented the people who looked at this also looked at that, and the people who bought this also bought that, which Amazon Books then copied. And it's become a standard in e-commerce now, where, you know, if you buy shopping online, you up straight away get what they've looked at. So let's have a look at one of the classic examples of social proof, which is Apple's white headphones and Sony's black ones.
Yeah, this was an interesting social proof use case, I think, because it's not the typical use case is almost always testimonials or quotes. But in this case, Apple actually created kind of a cultural movement, like a physical one in the real world, just by changing the color of their headphones. So when they came into the market, Sony and all their competitors had black headphones pretty solidly, and also black actual like Walkmans. All Apple had to do was just come in and change the color of their headphones, and then everybody would see people walking around with this new color, this white kind of very pristine color of headphones. And that in itself just shows social proof. The more you see it and the more people have it, the more you want to get it because everyone else is doing it and I might as well too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I worked on the Xerox account for years and we kept telling them to come up with coloured photocopiers and printers, and it was just too hard. And yet Apple then came up with the coloured MacBooks, you know, they did it and they made it popular. You also talked about biology in marketing, the round button behaviour case study.
This was one of my favorite ones that I ever accidentally tested.
Yeah.
So I found a study that said that rounded buttons can increase conversion rates on product pages. And so I had a good friend of mine, Nate, actually run it for me because he's the CMO for Original Grain, which makes these really cool reclaimed watches. So they actually ran a test, and it was amazing the way he did it because they weren't running any other tests at the time. So the only thing he changed was the actual square buttons that were the call to actions on these pages.
Yeah.
So he changed it from square to this round, this kind of circular thing. And it increased the conversion rates on this page by 39%. Just by changing the shape of the button. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
That's amazing.
Really cool.
You've also got the Original Grain examples that show emotional segmentation. Let's have a look at those.
Yeah, so it's interesting because while they were doing this test on the site, he and I were doing a lot of messaging tests from an emotional standpoint. And originally they were running a lot of the ads on the left, which was this kind of definitive, we're calling out one specific identity of a person, and then we're basically just inviting people to purchase. I kind of pushed the offer of we need to get a little bit more emotional with this, especially if you're going towards a gifter audience. And then she's female, married, wants to find something for her significant other. Let's go a little more feminine and a little bit more emotional into what she actually wants from the product, which is to show him appreciation.
Yeah.
So these two ads ran at the same time, and it was actually the show him he's worth every second. That messaging, they're still running today, 4 years later. Because it works so incredibly well.
And a nice pun with the second there. I suspect if you were to target malware as the headline and change it to if you love drinking whiskey, you'll love the watches made from whiskey barrels might work well for men who are buying. One thing I do is I write for a living, you know, and I think that I write emotionally. Here's an example of factual writing versus emotional writing that demonstrates the difference. Take us through that.
Yeah, so oftentimes when I work with marketers, especially when I'm trying to train new marketers in more emotional marketing, they will go towards factual things, right? Very focused, feature-based, or possibly even a little bit benefit-focused. What I try and do is make sure we focus straight on the actual emotion of what people are experiencing in the behavior of consuming the product. So protein perfected is great, it's nice, but it doesn't really tell me a whole lot about which emotion that's going to solve for me. No time for breakfast, no problem. That's a much better emotionally focused headline because it calls out a specific use case, right? And it also kind of, you know, to Jono's point, brings up a little bit of cortisol and makes me a little stressed because I've had that experience. I'm stressed out for breakfast. This is the solution to that.
And Jono, your thoughts on that with emotion versus rational?
Look, emotional wins every time. Emotion is really simple to process. It's system one. Rational is system two, which requires a lot of energy to process that information. Like protein perfected, it was like a great tagline and a board would sign off and they're like, that's clever, that's smart. But it's not how consumers process advertising. So it's emotion every day of the week.
Okay, here's another example actually, which we use and I teach in university cases from Betty Crocker. Do you want to take us through that, Sarah?
Yes, I love this case study because it was one of the first that I actually found when I started doing a lot of studying on behavior science. And this one in particular was kind of an older test, I guess you could say. Betty Crocker actually made these kind of like in a box cake mixes originally without any sort of extra ingredients. It was literally everything in a box. It was all powderized. So even the eggs, right, came in powdered form. All you had to do was dump the box in, add water, and it would work.
Yep.
The problem was nobody was buying it. They were selling it to kind of these like stay-at-home moms, stay-at-home wives who were used to making very elaborate cakes and spending a long time perfecting it because it was a way that they showed appreciation to their families. So when Betty Crocker came out with this and things weren't selling, they did something really interesting to fix this problem of it's not hard enough, right? It doesn't feel like making an at-home cake. So all they did was take the egg, the oil, and the water out. So you had to use things from inside your own kitchen along with the box mix to be able to make it. And I mean, sales just skyrocketed overnight just based upon the fact that they made it a little hard to produce, and it just made women feel a lot better.
You call this the IKEA effect, because they've certainly made it hard to put a damn flat top table together.
Exactly. IKEA does this all the time. You have to build your own furniture, but people kind of like it.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's our IKEA effect. The decoy effect is another handy way to increase sales as well. Talk us through that.
Yeah, so this one actually came out of Williams-Sonoma. They actually were one of the very first to produce a bread making machine, similar to kind of the one on the left, kind of a smaller model. Had a really hard time selling it. Again, nobody really knew what to do with it because it was innovative, new to the market. So they brought in a behavior science focused agency who said, don't change the model. You don't need to do anything with the original. You just need to introduce one that's bigger, faster, has more features, is more expensive. So they just went and made a bigger model bread maker, set it right next to the small one, and sales started to increase just based upon the fact that there was a decoy in the room, right? There was something that was basically built to take people's attention off of this smaller model. And again, provided context. Bigger model, higher price. I'll probably go for the smaller one, just based upon all these different.
In a similar way to the LED example that Jono was showing. You know, have you seen other examples of this, Jono?
Yeah, you see this all the time. Like decoy is such an amazing thing. Like even with price, you know, most brands will have 3 different price points, but what you do with the middle one and how you move that to the left or the right will determine what people will actually buy. So leveraging decoy is incredibly powerful.
Okay, well, behavioural science, and this is it has been used in product development for decades. Sarah, do you want to take us through the pharmaceutical and the dishwashing examples? Because I surprise my students when I discuss this with them.
When it comes to any sort of pill, humans are very, very sensitive to not poisoning themselves. So the color of the pill is actually pretty important. And this is the reason why the majority of the time when you take any sort of prescription pill, it's white, sometimes blue. And any sort of pill that's made for like headaches or things like that is often red. The color of what we actually produce in a product form changes how people actually behave with it, which is fascinating.
Wow.
So I think it was Rory Sutherland that said you could drastically change consumption rates for antibiotics just by telling people you need to take 15 of the blue ones and then 15 of the red ones. Give them an actual kind of program that they have to walk through. It could be exactly the same medication. Just by changing the color, though, you'll change how people behave.
It's like the day-night cold or the day-night flu tablets, where you get white one for day and blue for night, and that way people consume them because you've led them through it. What about, the dishwashing one's interesting because I ask my students, I say to them, why do you think there are bubbles in dishwashing liquid? Do you want to talk to that?
Yes, you and I were talking about this a lot beforehand. I never quite understood why there were bubbles in dishwashing. It just was always there ever since a kid. You just pour it on something and it foams, it like lathers. Same thing for shampoo. Technically speaking, you don't have to have anything lather for it to do what it's supposed to do, which is like strip grease or like, you know, what do they call it? Like disinfect.
Yes.
So technically speaking, the foam is just for marketing purposes.
It's to show activation and make it appear as if it's working.
Yeah, people just like it, so we keep doing it. It's interesting.
And you also talk about processing fluency, Sarah. Can you explain what that is?
Yes. So this is kind of a cognitive bias that basically states that we're heavily influenced by how easy it is to process information. So if something is really hard to process for the brain, we'll often kind of prefer a simplified version of it. So we'll default to that option. So a very expensive, like bells and whistles car that has 80 million buttons in it, and I have to figure out how to do that. I'm probably not going to purchase that one
Yep.
because it's difficult for me to understand how I'm going to be able to manage that as compared to like a Corolla. That's just simple. It makes it super
Yeah,
easy.
makes it
Making
easy.
those choices though comes down to how easy it is to process in the brain.
Okay. Well, fascinating stuff. Jono, you've also developed what you call 12 superpowers of influence, a couple of which we've covered today with bias and social validation. You're obviously going to go to them in your new book, but can you share some promise proof with us because the process in this is really interesting.
Yeah, promise proof really hinges on the three brain theory and how we filter information. The reptilian brain is the primary filter for everything that is in our world. So if we look at promise proof, there's a real clear formula that we leverage. And if you're looking at historically, this is actually a proven direct response TV formula, and it's leveraged across a range of different assets. But the first part and the key ingredient, which is one of our overarching principles, is you have to get attention, which is something new, novel, or it's either a threat or opportunity. So you got to grab attention from the opening. Then once you've got attention, you've got to do something meaningful with it, which is a promise. Like, what is your brand promise, product promise? How are you going to impact the consumer's world? Then we've still got, and we're holding attention. This is a thing most brands leave out. It's proof, or it's a RTB, or a reason to believe that promise is true. So it's supporting evidence. It's like the because frame. And this is really critical to this strategy. So yeah, we've got to leverage all of those. And then at the end, there's a call to action. So we got to tell the consumer what to do next. Key to this, don't allow your consumer to think. Make it really simple for them and elegant. Get attention. What is your promise? Prove it, and then call to action. So there's an example here with Athena. Do you want to talk about that, Malcolm?
Yeah, take it through that. Athena's a new bank in Australia. So tell us a bit about it, Jono, because it's been quite successful.
So again, I'll credit Greg Logan here as well. That's been the creative director on Athena for a very long time. But Athena, challenger bank, taking on the big four in Australia, really hard project and task. So they had to get attention. They were doing things really different. And radio, they had a call that would call, and it would sound like someone was ringing to a call center. TV was different, but it was all very much Athena, and this was part of their long-term brand asset program. But their promise was, we'll help you save on average $61,000 off your home loan. It's significant. But then what they did was really clever. They created two new products to market. The first one was what they called accelerates. So it was as you paid off your home loan, your rate got lower. So they proved that promise to be true, and it gave evidence to support it. And they also were really clever and irreverent with what they were doing. So they had like fuck fees, for example, which also caught a lot of attention, but they don't charge fees, and a really simple call to action.
Yeah, it's been and I like the love us and leave us. You know, we want to get rid of you as soon as possible, but it was a nice, if you look at the DRTV or the TV, it just takes you through that thread that you explained. Now,
yeah, it does. A really simple and elegant ad.
Yeah. Now, by the marvels of technology, I now have my glasses on and an iPad in front of me because I've got a couple of questions from the audience. So here, I'm a marketing student, psychology-based marketer. Marketing is never touched upon. Why aren't we getting taught it? Why do you think this doesn't appear in university degrees? Sarah, do you want to take that one first?
Oh gosh, I could talk a lot about this. Honestly, I think that the universities didn't know they needed it. I think that they started with kind of this idea that psychology was its own thing, separate a little bit from what we do in marketing. Marketing is almost always tactical. There's step-by-step things that we do and have done for many, many decades, until social media came in, and then all of a sudden everything kind of turned upside down because we're so incredibly connected and we've got a lot of conversation happening online. So I don't know that the universities knew that they needed it until today, where everything that the brand does is emotionally focused.
All right.
Yeah.
Jono, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've done my MBA in marketing, and I probably use a really small percentage of that. What I have learned more is through especially sales and living and breathing it and trying new things yourself and leveraging other people's expertise. That has been the most important thing. And I think if you're looking at marketing, understanding how people behave is critical. The best marketers I've come across are people that have been at the coalface in sales. or they understand human behavior psychology. Like they are the two best or most extreme
I agree
scenarios.
to that point. And one other here was interesting is what point does consumer psychology become ethical or can it be used to mislead consumers? Are you seeing that as an issue, Sarah?
I have a difficult time with this because I've been asked this a lot. Isn't this manipulation? Like if you're using psychology or human behavior, is it not just manipulation? And usually my rebuttal to that is you're using psychology whether you know you are or not. And I would so much rather use it in like an ethical and very conscious way than accidentally use it in a place that I did not mean to.
Yeah.
So I don't see it as manipulation. I see it as more of like, this is how humans operate and how they work anyways. And I want to make sure that I'm not doing it in a way that's going to become an unethical problem. So
Yeah, I feel that all you're doing is reflecting relevance based on what you understand about consumers. Jono, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between influence and manipulation, and the difference is intent. If you've got a great product or service and you know that, and you can influence more consumers to buy that product and you're serving them, I think that is an amazing outcome. If on the other side, if it is a product that detracts, hurts, impacts in a negative way, that is manipulation.
Yeah. Okay, good answer. Thank you. And this is a subject we could talk about all day. It is fascinating. Amazingly, almost a lot of it isn't necessarily new. It's just been mostly ignored or not studied. Sarah, any advice for marketers or those creating advertising? Any last minute thoughts?
yes. If you're interested in learning kind of how the brain works and how you can use it in your marketing to attract more customers, best thing you can do is start small, right? So I've seen marketers try and do all of it all at once and get really deep into the weeds. I always tell people start with just your emotional messaging first. Start with that. And then you can test all of these really interesting studies and behavioral parts of humans. Because really it just comes down to creating those good, deep emotional connections with people. Because at the end of the day, we're just trying to help humans live a better life. So start small, then scale up from there.
Nice, thank you. And I like don't get stuck in all the weeds. Jono, your thoughts, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think I look at the two overarching principles, which you've got to get attention, make sure you're doing that. And number two, keep it really simple, which you're talking to the system one or our ancient brain. And that really riffs on to don't let your customers think. Complexity kills sales.
Yep.
Like complexity really is the death of customer acquisition. So yeah, learn how to talk to the primal brain.
Yeah, I think you're right there. If you've had experience in sales, it was, I think it was Tom Peters' reduction to the ridiculous. Bring something down to something they can understand in a very small way and just get lots of little yeses to lead to the big yes. And that's what it's about, keeping it simple. So thank you both for your unique insights today. And if the audience wants to tap into their reptilian brain some more, please visit their websites, read their resources. Jono's got a new book out, subscribe to Sarah's newsletter, have a look at their socials. I follow them both. It's fascinating. I could spend all day looking at it. So thank you both.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it,
Great
Malcolm.
to have you here, despite a little technical glitch. But folks, that wraps up episode 5 of the Big Marketing Show. So you all know our next episode 6 will be the last one for season 1, and we'll resume early in season 2 in 2025. Episode 6 is about the rise of retail media and why brands should be involved. The chair of the Australian Media Association, Retail Media Association, Lachlan Bray, is joining us along with another guest. So pencil in the 13 and 14 of November for the next episode. As always, follow our socials and share the love on LinkedIn if you like. Once again, a big thank you and shout out to Horizon Live Media for the continual support. And thank you for joining us in episode 5 and for being here on the virtual stage of the Big Marketing Show. Bye for now.